In this episode of the Life Doula Podcast, I share my personal journey of battling stage 4 cancer and emerging as a cancer survivor. Join me as I take you through a heartfelt exploration of my emotional, mental, and spiritual challenges through my cancer journey, offering an honest account of the various challenges I faced and conquered. Throughout this episode, I aim to shed light on the aspects of the cancer experience that often fall outside of the scope of the traditional medical treatment. By sharing my story, I hope to guide you and empower you on how to navigate through the deep mental, emotional, and spiritual obstacles that come with a cancer diagnosis. Sit with me for a candid conversation that goes beyond the typical narratives of a cancer survival. You will always hear me say this. Cancer is not just a physical battle. It's an emotional roller coaster that affects every aspect of a person's life. Let's start with the emotional hurdles and ways I've overcome them. Fear and anxiety. Fear and anxiety about the future, about cancer progression of the disease. This was the first of the many things I made sure I addressed. And for me, it was divinely addressed because I literally begged God to take the fear, and His answer was, faith and fear cannot coexist. You choose. Of course, I chose faith. Thus, one of my mantras up to now is faith over fear. Fear and anxiety can be mitigated through many ways. Mindfulness and other practices such as deep breathing, meditation. This can help individuals stay grounded and reduce stress. But this is a conscious discipline that a cancer warrior needs to build. And additionally, seeking support from a counselor or a coach can provide a safe space to explore fears and develop coping mechanisms to be able to shift the anxiety and the fears. The next emotional challenge is a feeling of sadness, grief, and depression. Looking back, my experience was more sadness and grief, but not really depression, and that's something I'm really grateful for. In my case, the sadness was always triggered every time I think of my children and my loved ones who I may leave behind. That really brings me to a very low point in my life. Grief was also very pronounced every time I get reminded of the limitations that cancer brought into my life. I grieved for the person that I was. Back then, I leaned into the power of community. I started setting up cancer support communities, no matter how small they are, because this becomes an avenue for myself and other women to be able to create a safe space to discuss all these emotional challenges. But others may require professional intervention. Therapy, support groups, and peer counseling can also provide emotional support and validation, helping cancer warriors navigate the complex emotions associated with cancer. But for me, next to fear and anxiety, one of the biggest emotional challenges I had to deal with was the loss of sense of control over my body and over the activities that I usually do. While this is an area I truly, truly struggled with, this is also where I grew the most. The way I really manage this loss of a sense of control is acceptance. It was the acceptance that cancer made my body to feel different and that my body is not the same. But the biggest loss of control that always haunts me is that sense of control that I want to know the outcome of my treatment. And God made me realize this is not within my control. I want to repeat this because a lot of cancer warriors struggle with this. We have no control over the outcome of our treatment, even if we work with the best oncologists, and even if we are taking one of the top line chemo cocktails. I will repeat this again. We have no control over the outcome. So every time I tend to control things, I ask myself, is this something I have control over? Or is this something beyond me? So I created virtual buckets. One bucket is for me, the things that I can control. So if I have challenges emotionally, I can put them in this bucket. Okay. So I have control over this. This is for charities box. But I also have what I call my FJTD. And it's for Jesus to do box. FJTD. And this is the box where I put all the things I have no control over. Results of my blood test, outcomes of my chemo, PET scans, all the type of scans. I put it in the FJTD box. And once I put it there, I release it from my heart. Because I know there's no one else I can trust with the things beyond my control except the God that I believe in. But there are other people who manage this by engaging in activities that foster self-expression, self-care, such as art therapy, music, journaling, or again, participating in support groups. This reminded me that I am still empowered, and somehow I feel I reclaim that sense of control. The other challenge emotionally is the struggle with self-esteem and body image issues. This came into my space, but not as strongly as it did with the other cancer warriors I know. And I'm putting a spotlight on this despite the fact that it wasn't a big thing for me, because other women really struggled with this. Cancer does change your body. And when it does, body image becomes a huge and a top concern. Like, it didn't bother me that, I was prancing around with no hair, I was bald. In fact, it gave me a good excuse to shop for nice big hoop earrings. I mean, seriously, losing my hair was the least of my problems. And neither was I wedded to my boobs, I remember after my surgery, a doctor came to my room. Apparently, she was a psychiatrist. She was asking me if I was starting to get depressed, that I lost my right breast. And my answer to her was, it's not so obvious because literally I only have, a chest, even if I still had my left breast. So that's how I wasn't so wedded with my breast. But for other women, self-image affects their self-esteem and it becomes an emotional challenge. especially if, number one, they're single when they were diagnosed with cancer. But there are so many options now. You can do breast expander, and some would resort to implants, which is totally acceptable. Now, as far as the hair is concerned, there are really nice wigs that you can wear. And as a matter of fact, a lot of my clients, before they go into chemotherapy, I ask them to seek medical clearance and have their eyebrows microbladed. After all, you want to feel good while you're going through the cancer journey, and for sure, especially if you're a breast cancer warrior, you will lose your hair, you will lose your eyebrows, eyelashes, and this causes a lot of stress in a lot of women. But, there are other interventions that you can use, like really, really thinking about being kind to yourself, self-compassion and self-acceptance practices, encouraging cancer warriors to focus on the inner strengths and qualities rather than the external appearances. And then this can foster a more positive self-image. And finally, under emotional challenges, coping with a constant cycle of medical tests and treatments and follow-ups. This can literally overwhelm cancer warriors. And I was also overwhelmed at the beginning of my journey. It's not every day that you are told. There's no guarantee when your chemotherapy will stop. When I heard that from my oncologist, it kept me awake for several nights until I remembered my FJTD box. Do I really have control over my response to the treatment? Do I really have control when my chemotherapy will end? Again, put it on my FJTD box. And this image in the Bible of the lamp that lights just my feet or the next step comforted me each time I felt overwhelmed. God would just light my path enough for me to see the next step, and I had to make peace with it. Cancer warriors can feel drained, emotionally drained, just the thought of hospital trips, scans, and endless blood works. And I mean endless. However, it can be less overwhelming if you try to do some time management and this mindset that all these things, your chemotherapy, your blood works, your mid-treatment scans, these are all necessary for your healing. Now let's shift our focus to mental challenges faced by those living with cancer and ways to mitigate them. Cognitive impairment, chemo brain. This was more pronounced at the height of my treatment. And even 7 years after treatment, I still have episodes of this. But I have come to address this by just laughing about it. And I mean, it is what it is. Chemo brain is not something that you can take a pill and it'll go away. I somehow created a structure wherein the important things related to my medical case, my caregiver has a complete list. And she can remind me of medicines that I need to take, my medical schedules. At work, because during the time that I was undergoing treatment, I was still working, I gave my team a heads up. So for the important stuff, I did a voice recording. Someone from my team will remind me. But you see, what cannot be helped are scenarios like this. You go to your kitchen, you open your kitchen cabinet, and suddenly you realize, what am I doing here? What am I going to pick up? Or you open your refrigerator and all of a sudden you just stare at it because you don't know exactly what you're going to get. And again, I just end up laughing about it. All of this can be managed also by cognitive rehabilitation, exercises, and brain training activities. Simple tasks such as getting involved in puzzles, memory games, Sudoku. A lot of my co-cancer patients before would go into that because they said it helps them with their cognitive function. The other mental challenge that can really, really cause stress is managing financial burdens. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who gets diagnosed with cancer, whether they are rich or poor, will always feel the impact on the pocket. During my time, I also had to face this anguish because I think on the second cycle of my chemotherapy, my HMO was completely depleted. I faced this, but again, the answer to this challenge was another divine intervention. For some reason, abundance and provision came from many different directions. Plus, I was truly, truly blessed that during the time that I was battling with stage 4 breast cancer, my employer back then, the Aboitis family, really took care of me very well. So I have been doing the math in my head. The amount of savings that I had, insurance coverage depleted, if I put together everything that I spent, it doesn't add up. In the books, it will say it's a negative. And yet provisions came. There was never a treatment where I had to worry about where I will get almost 500,000 pesos every week. This is a pivotal point in my relationship with my father, our father. I realized while he allowed me to go through this, he provided for everything that I needed. All I had to do was open my palms and learn to accept the good. But for those experiencing this, I would encourage you to seek assistance from healthcare professionals, social workers, and other branches of government that really helps cancer patients and even those with other diseases. I am not a financial advisor, but probably this is the best time. If you are listening and you are predisposed, this is the best time for you to invest in the right company and in the right financial instrument. Mental challenge. Addressing persistent negative thoughts like worry or I will not respond to this treatment in the beginning was one of the strongest mental challenges I had to carry. And this is how I manage it up to now. Cancer is a physical disease, but the battlefield is in the mind. So another mantra that I adopted is not one negative thought. I will repeat, not one negative thought. Each time a negative thought crosses my mind, I hold that thought captive and I ask myself, would you rather dwell on this negative thought or reframe it and counter it with a positive thought? It takes a lot of practice to be able to incorporate this in my life. Again, seeking help from therapists, coaches, or a counselor will help you and find someone that can teach you and constantly remind you how to reframe your negative thoughts and live in the present moment. It truly helps reduce anxiety and you will find peace amidst the uncertainty. So we've discussed emotional challenges, mental challenges. Now we go to spiritual challenges. 8 years ago, as a Cancer warrior, the spiritual roller coaster was intense, leading me to confront deep-seated struggles that test the core of beliefs and faith. But let me say this, despite these struggles that I felt, I saw and felt the hand of God in whatever difficulties I was going through. The weight of suffering and uncertainty is one spiritual struggle that has often left me questioning, when will this end? Steering a storm of doubt and introspection within me. Seeking clarity in the storm, I've turned to my spiritual and my faith community for guidance, finding solace in practices like prayer and praise and worship, meditation. What worked for me was really devouring the Word of God and saving in my phone all the healing verses and promises of God. And here is what I did. I read these verses and God's promises like they were medicine. I would read different verse 6 to 8 times a day, literally like a prescription. They were medicine for my soul. I still have these verses on my phone, so if any one of you is interested, I can share them with you. Spirituality and faith are personal. So my only counsel, if you are experiencing these challenges, is to be committed to your quiet time. And your time with God should be the most important appointment of your day. Do not even begin your day without sitting with God and just being with Him. Feeling spiritually disconnected and abandoned are one of the spiritual challenges of many Cancer warriors. The sense of isolation weighs very heavily. And there are ways you can find connection in nature. Nature reminds us that there is a higher being who is in control. You can also turn to art, and you can also seek wisdom of your spiritual mentors. Engaging in these outlets can be your sanctuary, a place where you can restore connection to something greater and find peace amidst the chaos. Now, this spiritual challenge, finding meaning and purpose. In my Cancer journey, it was not a challenge, but a gift. All the stories I shared about my Cancer journey underlines the fact that I never asked God why. I asked God, what? God, what do you want me to do here? What do you want me to do for you? I kept asking those questions. And finally, one day, I found the answer. It led me to my purpose. Finding the meaning of your own Cancer journey, in my opinion, is the start of your healing process. However, this spiritual challenge of existential fears of mortality clouded my mind as well, stirring up deep-rooted anxieties. And I navigated through this by running towards fear of death. In my other podcast, I talked about this. Instead of running away from it, I ran towards it and befriended it. Why? Because I had no choice. I was already staring at it. I sat with it and really dug deep. And finding the answer was really liberating. And this is why I say it was at 49 that I only started living. 49 was the age I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. The high probability of my life ending taught me how to truly live. For those of you facing the same challenge, I invite you to consider my approach. I face it rather than turning away from it. However, there are other interventions. Again, you can turn to mindfulness practices, leaning on the support of your loved ones. If you have a spiritual guide or a spiritual director, you can begin to find courage to face these fears head on. And at this point, I can never overemphasize the power of having a community in navigating through all these challenges. As I sit here today, reflecting on my journey through cancer, I realize that the challenges I've faced have been the opportunities of growth, healing, and profound awakening. Choosing to put a spotlight on the mental, emotional, and spiritual challenges a person living with cancer experience is underlining one of my biggest advocacies. Healing from cancer should be a patient-centric approach. We do not just treat the tumor, but we treat the whole person in its entirety. Every person living with cancer should be aware of this. Healing from cancer requires treating you as a person and not just your tumor. Thank you for joining me on this introspective journey of the emotional, mental, and spiritual challenges of cancer. Remember, as we navigate the storms of life, it is in the depths of our struggles that we often find our greatest strengths and deepest truths. Until next time, this is your Life Doula. Heal strong, stay hopeful, and keep embracing the journey.